Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Age of Aquarius podcast. My name is Andrei. I'm sitting here with my wife, Rachel, and we are joined by our good friend and co-host, Frederick Woodruff.
Good to see you guys again and everybody watching.
It's
This is
wonderful to see you.
episode 1 coming out of 0.
Yeah,
So we've got our sea legs on, I think, a little bit better. Yeah.
I think so.
Yes.
Today we wanted to begin by talking about the very muddled and totally, uninstitutionalized line between having astrology as a hobby and having astrology as a profession. Both Frederick and I often get asked, how do you become an astrologer? We know a lot of people that are interested in it, that study it, even read for their friends, but they don't really know when it is or how you cross the line. How do you become an astrologer? How do you end up calling yourself that? So I think we should start by hearing from you, Frederick, because you've been in this game for a very long time and you know
Because I'm 800 years old. Yeah, I mean, and I took notes on this because when we chose this as a topic, I thought, well, this will be easy to wing it. But then I realized it's a little bit more granular than that. Like, as far as I've experienced what happens when somebody enters the path of, an astrological tradition.
Mhm.
So anyway, I took some notes. I'm going to be accessing that, and then we'll just, kind of wing it as we go, because I don't want to just be sitting here talking nonstop. But I'll start like this. The number one point has to do with why, not how,
Mm.
in the sense that if you understand the why you're drawn to astrology, that I think opens the path to the how of becoming an astrologer.
Mm.
And then that also invites that strange alchemy that happens, that it reflects that idea of when the student's ready, the teacher will appear.
Mhm.
Um, and then, as I said in my notes here, also when the student's ready, the teacher will disappear.
Mhm.
And then that's sort of, where the astrologer really launches out in his or her own, uh, ethos or whatever.
Mm.
So thoughts on that from you guys, or?
That's interesting that you said that the teacher disappears when you're ready, because
The
airplanes
teacher clearly appeared.
sorry.
It's coming down in a parachute.
Yeah.
We live in a city, everyone. It can't be helped. But anyways,
I don't hear anything on my end.
the last official astrology class that I took was an online class. Prior to that, I had taken some classes in person. Mostly it's been self-study, but the last class that I was in, as soon as I finished the class, my teacher really did disappear. Like, it was almost like there was some kind of like cold shoulder. I got literally a cold shoulder suddenly, and there had been no like discernible drama or anything that I could figure out that I had done wrong. But suddenly there was just no communication, super cold shoulder. And you're right. I feel like rather than taking that personally or having some kind of overwrought story attached to that, it was truly the push that I needed to just realize, like, oh, okay, so I'm not really a student of this person anymore. I have to break out on my own. So it literally did happen that way. And I never really thought about it. I never thought about why that happened, but it was
Right.
good for me. It was good for me because I did legitimately strike out on my own a few months later, like after
Right.
I was done. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I like that assessment that the teacher disappears.
Yeah.
I think it's a really great way of looking at any path in life. because we tend to grow overly attached to our authority figures
Yep.
and dependent on them, and we'll never think we're ready to take the big leap, into the field. And this will also tie into what we're going to talk about later, with the Age of Aquarius. But this Aquarian era that we've entered into, um, it's an era that I believe will uphold independence above all virtues, and to be in the field without your guide, because you have mastered some sense of direction. You've learned to understand your environment, um, and you've learned to trust yourself in your environment. I think are really core principles, core discipline to have, in the world that we live in now. The way I relate to this is recently, I'd been practicing Taoist internal arts for the last 10 years at a school in the San Fernando Valley, and during the pandemic it closed, and there was this moment of loss and grief, and the moment continues. But the thing I talked about with one of my kung fu brothers at the school was that we said we're living in a sifu-less world. Sifu means master, and the world we live in now, it's a sifu-less world. It's a world where you have to become your own sifu, you have to become your own guru, you have to become your own master. And so it's the greatest blessing that a teacher can give to you, I think, is to disappear.
Right on. Yes. I want to say one thing about that saw of, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. That can show up in myriad ways. It could be, you're in a bookstore and you see a book on astrology, and you pick it up, or your next door neighbor's mother is an astrologer and she's good friends with her, and you get exposed to it that way. Of course, nowadays with the internet, we're just sort of like inundated with astrology, and it's such a crapshoot. I think it's great that we're doing this topic to try to at least give some pointers on fine tuning
Yeah.
and discriminating.
Yeah.
So that said, back to the notion of why before how. And what I wrote here on my notes was that the why has to do with our relationship to nature. And as Camille Paglia said at the start of her fabulous book, Sexual Personae, in the beginning was nature. And then nature has a, master agenda that we can dimly know what that is. And astrology is actually a key way to start to gain access to what that flow is that we all live within, within nature. So if you have a poor relationship to nature, which means you don't really feel, and this is my interpretation of what it feels like to have a good relationship with nature, is you have a sense of awe and wonder and mystery, and you want to go deeper with that. So of course there's a lot of spiritual, religious paths that one could do, or you could go into science and try to, understand nature that way and master it, or art. And that's where astrology comes in, because I think actually astrology was the first art that ever arose out of human consciousness. The idea of people looking up at the stars and like, what is it? What's it about? Noticing cycles, taking, accrued data on the cycles, and then setting up a system and a language.
Yeah,
And I think that's a good way to condense the idea of the start of astrology.
I think
Okay.
so. And that actually, that's a big part of, at least for me, my why I was attracted to astrology. Obviously, when I was a teenager, I wanted to know what all my friends' signs were. And I had like the very classic, basic attraction to astrology as well. Popular horoscope astrology was fun for me. But the reason why I took it seriously and actually started to study it and continued on with it, even when I was in grad school and stuff, was because one of my very first passions was ancient history, as
Mm.
in like the seven wonders of the ancient world, ancient Egypt to ancient Rome. This really fascinates me. It always really just like carried my imagination into the most ecstatic and blissful places. And so anytime I was able to explore the ancient world at any capacity, whether it was an exhibit at a museum or just reading like big textbooks, like I got a big textbook on the seven wonders of the ancient world when I was in sixth grade, and I read the whole thing and I wrote a research paper on it, a 13-page research paper when I was 11. Like I
That's
was
cool.
really into it. And so when I realized that astrology was kind of the oldest body of knowledge on the planet, and that it is sort of the inspiration for not only mythology and this kind of mythopoeic symbolic level of reality, but also knowledge of the stars inspired architecture and geometry, and all kinds of things were sort of born from this mother of all sciences, as it's called in some histories. So that for me was the big why that strung everything together
Mhm.
and made it very important for me to study, much more so than like, what sign am I most compatible with, blah, blah, blah. Although that's fun. And I was into that too, but that's not why I became an astrologer. Like,
Right. I think though that has that's a good point to bring up about pop astrology, because I know in my childhood, because my mom and grandmother were into astrology, there were books around the house, and thankfully they were good ones. They were like Grant Louis's Heaven Knows What and Astrology for the Millions. Do you guys know those books?
astrology for the millions, is that Alan Leo?
No, it's
Oh,
Grant Louis. He was a New
no.
York astrologer,
Yeah,
and
no.
oh wow, we'll talk about that later. I'm
Okay.
doing a piece on him on my Substack,
Oh,
because
cool.
that was such a great entry to astrology that had enough of the pop element to it. Because he would do, your moon sign, sun signs together, so you could get more of a detailed sort of psychological understanding. And that was the other thing about Louis, is I think was really the first astrologer to bring psychology in to astrology. And this
Hmm.
was back way back, like 1930s and stuff like that when that started.
Yeah.
And I think Alan Leo was considered like the first like popular, astrologer that integrated parts of psychology, and Llewellyn George was another. But anyway, I got off track. It's I think a lot of us come to astrology through the sun signs, the compatibility things, all of that. And that's like you say, it's fun,
Mhm.
but it's just the rind
Yeah.
of it, obviously. Did you
Yeah.
want to add anything to what we were talking about, Andre? Or
Not at this moment.
okay, I didn't want you
Andre
to think I
Andre
was
didn't like
plowing ahead.
astrology for
Yeah, no,
he thought it was like,
well, because my entry into astrology was actually through my magical practice.
Mhm.
And I started off on with chaos magic,
Mhm.
which, like, it's funny to say classic chaos magic, because the idea of chaos magic is there's no classics, there's no tradition. It's like it's an evolving discipline. But the classic chaos magic text is Liber Null by Peter J. Carroll, and he was attempting to strip magic of its superstitions, of its mysticism, and create a, you know, a verifiable scientific discipline. You know, I believe he's by trade, he's actually a mathematician, and he outright rejected astrology and alchemy as these dead sciences that have no place in the modern in the modern magical practice. But the thing about chaos magic is that, you know, you're encouraged, you know, nothing is true, everything is permissible. So you are encouraged to question your teachers, question your knowledge. And so I came to astrology that way, as a way to expand deepen my magical practice. You know, the emanations on the tree of life all have astrological correspondences, and so it became this way for me to actually understand the cycles of nature, and, you know, when maybe the best time to schedule a ritual or a spell would be on the calendar. So it was more of a, and it still actually in a lot of ways has remained, that is just a sort of a practical timekeeping tool.
Right. Cool. Okay. So I've got other notes here. So I say here, when you contemplate your relationship to nature, you will begin to contemplate how astrology first appeared in the imagination. And then also noting that astrology is more than doing horoscopes. That came way later in astrology's history. And just like we were talking about, at the core, the relationship between humans, nature, and cycles is like a great way to condense the notion of what astrology is about. The study of cycles is at the heart, the foundation of astrology as an art. Okay, other notes I've got here. I say the specifics of how to become an astrologer should come with the caveat of how not to become an astrologer. And so I'm going to do a little bit of via negativa path right here.
Okay.
Don't avoid doing research. And I think this is a key thing given the glut of everything that's on the internet, and, you know, things always coming at people and flashing and offering this and that, and spend time like really, you know, researching who's offering what, or what some school's about, stuff like that. I think that's a commonsensical thing. And then the next big topic would be, once your interest is piqued, don't read the bad books. It would be, you know, kind of a no-brainer. And this goes back to a bit of the thing about pop astrology, with the number of books, you know, how to have sex with the zodiac's best, you know, sign, and how to get a boyfriend, and, you know, how to make $1 million, how to know the secret of your soul. All of those kind of things have kind of a, I don't know, tabloid vibe to them. So it's not really going to be meaty astrology. And I think that's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Now this is kind of kooky what I'm going to say here, but I really do believe this. If I were starting out now, as I did when I was really, really young, and had my sight set on, you know, becoming a professional astrologer, I would have moved to England. And you know, only because my passion was so strong when I was young, and there wasn't really anything with that kind of academic discipline in the States. Like when I was doing astrology as a kid, because I started at 13, you would have to go to places like that had more of a religious skew. Like I remember the first temple of astrology was a place to go in LA. And the Church of Light which was another LA kind of institution by C.C. Zane that he
Yeah.
started.
Yeah.
So they all had that kind of patina to them. But what they do in England, and of course I know there's schools here in America. I think, is Kepler still going?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's strictly online though, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And not knocking online, but I do think there's something to be said for being around peers physically and a
Yeah.
teacher
Yeah.
physically related to transmission and dialectic. And yeah, there's Zoom and all of that. So I'm partial though to in the person kind of things. Um, so anyway, we can't all go to England. Any thoughts on England or that?
Well, I understand what you mean.
Over?
Like the in person, you know, it's just the things you learn in the field are so multifarious,
Yeah.
where it's not just the lecture, it's not just, you know, it's not just the content, it's, you know, it's having a cigarette with a classmate when class is
Yes.
over, and you're talking about everything but astrology,
Mhm.
you know, but sharing those stories, life experiences, talking about a film you just saw, it's going to start, you're going to have this model of astrology because you just got out of a lecture on it, you know, and you're going to
Yep.
start mapping that conversation and seeing things more clearly. I mean, I remember once I was carpooling to an algebra class at community college. I was with a coworker, and we were both about to transfer out to university. And I would just, on the ride home, I would see our conversation as these like algebraic equations, and I would see the traffic patterns play out as, you know, as algebraic equations, you know. And it's when immediately, you know, that immediate experience you can have of actually seeing the content, seeing the model, seeing the maps that you just you know, you were just studying and contemplating and meditating on and assimilating and receiving from your teacher, actually play out in some sort of, you know, some sort of kismet that you're having with, you know, with your classmates. So
I would still like to go to England, actually. Like,
Mm.
I don't feel like it's completely off the table. It's a little outside of my means at the moment, but that doesn't mean that I'm not dreaming about such a thing, because
Mhm.
I've been to Bath and it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. I felt really good there. Like,
Yeah.
the energy in that city is exquisite. And again, one of the reasons I loved it so much is because there's the Roman ruins and there's the quaint English village. You know, it's just so beautiful. And the church there is really special. And that's where one of the astrology universities is.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, you know, as Andrei was saying, online is great. I teach astrology online, so I'm not knocking the experience at all. It
And
can be,
neither am I.
but you know, a classroom, an actual physical classroom, let's just say, you know, it's kind of like when you do psychedelics with other people, you share a journey together, you share a trip, you actually have a group mind that experiences something together, that combines all of your gifts. And there's a special chemistry to being in person that we really need to acknowledge, especially in this age of this Aquarian era that we're entering,
Right.
where our technology is amazing, but it's also a wedge that separates us from having chemistry with one another, having like a certain physical experience that does have alchemical power to do some things that cannot be reproduced or recreated virtually.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and also just that crazy thing people do when they're around each other studying astrology.
Yeah.
You, you know how it goes. It's like, oh, well, you know, my Mars is in Gemini, and that'll be the shorthand for some topic or personality or whatever that is
Yeah.
going on between you and another person.
The
And
tension. Yeah.
you get that you're with somebody with their Mars and Gemini, and it helps kind of inculcate that, understanding into your being.
Yep.
Um, I don't know, I guess um, the conferences and all that do provide that for people, as a gathering place still. So that's another way that that can happen. But the academic vigor that's in, like, you're getting a diploma, you're getting a certificate, I think in England you have to study astronomy
Yeah.
as well, which would be one reason I wouldn't go. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, there's a gravitas there that, and this could be my own myth making in my mind, because so many of the astrologers that I really value are there.
Yeah.
People like Liz Green, Bernadette, I forget her last name now, Roberts, or there's a slew of them there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole.
Well,
So,
but
go
just to, wrap that up, the thing that's really attractive about it is that it's legitimized. And not that everything I do has to be legitimized by society, but it's a lot of heavy lifting to talk about astrology with anyone outside of the astrology community,
Mhm.
because there's a tremendous amount of ignorance and superstition. So you might be talking to someone who's interested in it, but they think it's something that it's not. Or you might be talking to someone, which is very common, that thinks it's complete and utter nonsense and total foolishness. And there's a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of wading through a lot of,
Mhm.
you know, uh, energy wasting dialogue. But if you're at a university for astrology, you don't have to waste any time. There's actually a collaborative effort that's really well funded and good production values, like they say in Hollywood, good production values, and a real dialogue and a real conversation and a real meeting of minds is happening, which creates philosophical breakthroughs, it creates innovation, and obviously having a good education is a privilege. So I think that as much as I take pride in being so autodidactic and DIY and kind of like, you know, independent, I love that about my life and my path. But I think it would have been really amazing to have the academic experience I had, but instead of studying critical theory and a bunch of nonsense, actually study something that I'm interested in, like truly passionate about, so it would
Right,
have been amazing. Yeah.
right. I hear you. Um, all right. So I think the next thing I was going to talk about here is, and I don't know, I feel like we've kind of left the listener viewer in the lurch. Like, well, I can't get to England, so what am I going to do? I guess I'll just read books. And of course, that's not the case.
Mm.
I'll just say as a disclaimer, I'm really not that up on, like, what is happening out there online. I know there's the evolutionary school, traditional school, there's Vedic schools, all that's being taught.
Mhm.
So, that's available to people. I just want to say that,
Yeah.
right?
You can
Okay,
get
so,
certified. You can get certified by many different schools. There's
right.
the International Society for Astrological Research, ISAR. They have a rigorous certification program that I think is a hybrid of in-person and online. I think you can do it all online if you want. So
Cool.
for people that like that kind of thing, you
Mm.
can do it.
And is the AFA, are they still going? American Federation of Astrologers, stuff like that? Like,
I don't
that
know
was an
anything about that.
old group that's been around for 1,000 years.
Yeah, I
But
don't know.
anyway, so that leads me to the next thing that I think the novice or the potential student would need to confront, which would be, do they want to study what I'll call traditional astrology?
Mhm.
And that could include Vedic, as well as, the Hellenistic school, all of that. Or do they have an inclination for psychological, or would you call that modern astrology?
I would, as
Yeah,
in like
Yeah,
so
like the evolutionary
20th
path.
century. Yeah.
no, I see
Like,
the evolutionary school, just from my point of view and understanding, is it has a definite spiritual
I see.
skew.
Hmm.
Past lives,
Um,
reincarnation, the
yeah,
nodes,
yeah.
like
that kind
Jung.
of thing.
Yeah, I gather.
And that has no, for me personally, I have no interest in that. I don't jibe with it. Anyway, that's a whole other show. Um, so that would be something for the person after they get to this place where they want to commit, understanding that there's pretty distinct paths related to modern and traditional,
Mhm.
right?
Yes, for sure.
When I teach astrology, I do have the students learn traditional because, not as this is the way you're going to go all the way forward, but it does contain within the Western tradition rulerships, the methods, the rules,
Mm-hmm.
understanding the affinities between planets and signs, all of that,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
But then on the other hand, it's very dry and event oriented
Mhm.
and fatalistic slanting. And it doesn't, to me at least, as I've experienced it, it doesn't have a rich psychological lexicon to cull from.
Mhm.
And when you're sitting down with another person doing their chart, having a dialectic, you I think you have to have a psychological language at your disposal.
Mhm.
And that's the beauty to me of modern psychological astrology, is that it's incorporated psychology into the dialectic, right?
Yeah, and I I've probably had one of the biggest evolutions as an astrologer when I read Thomas More's The Planets Within.
Oh God, fabulous book.
It's
Wow.
a fabulous book. It completely blew my mind, and like it
Yeah,
really,
that's a must.
yeah, it is a must. It changed the way that I speak and think about everything, not just astrology, but alchemy and hermeticism, the Renaissance itself.
Right.
And what's beautiful about that book is that it gives you accessible knowledge of the paradigm that Marsilio Ficino, the father of the Italian Renaissance, actually had about his work in the world. So Marsilio Ficino is the man that translated all of the Greek philosophy into Latin and completely changed the European worldview. He
Right.
was therefore the father of the Renaissance. And he wasn't just translating Plato, although that was very important. He was translating the Hermetic corpus, and he created this magical Hermetic revival. And he was famous for being not just a physician, as his father was. His father was the physician to the de Medici family. So his role would have been to be apprenticed to his father, but he became something far more. And they called him the physician of the soul, which is what a psychologist is in our world, or at least should be,
Right.
and they were speaking in the language that they had available to them at the time. So Marsilio Ficino took his work as physician of the soul very seriously. And the language that he used was astrology. He used the planets,
Mhm.
his knowledge of alchemy and astrology to actually map the psyche or the soul, and to use that knowledge to create harmony within people that were suffering. Harmony using scent and color and poetry and just knowledge of what it was that they needed. So in his own experience, he felt really brought down by melancholy, which he had obviously associated with the position of Saturn in his chart. He was oppressed by Saturnine influences. And it was something that he himself had to struggle to balance a lot in his life. And then he used his discovery or his rediscovery of the works of Plato to understand that that experience of melancholy is actually a divine frenzy. And this was something that the Greeks understood, that even an unpleasant but intense emotional state actually is bringing you closer to the divine. Or in this case, he interpreted it as you're actually sort of cocooning and being brought in closer communion with your soul. And then what follows is a rebirth. And so he saw the alchemical transmutation of the soul within the experience of melancholy itself.
Right.
Which is obviously, it's tremendous suffering. Any melancholic person knows how unpleasant it is. I myself am a melancholic person. And so I found that to be genuinely healing. So I was healed by Marsilio Ficino 500 years later.
Right.
And it's not that he took the state away, but when he provided me that context for understanding, it literally changed my life, because prior to that, I had always thought that's something that needs to be cured, as in taken away.
Right.
That's something that's bad. It's wrong. It's something that has to go away. It has to be removed from my experience. When I found out, like, no, it's actually natural. It's a part of a process. It's really important. You become deeper and more compassionate after a melancholic episode. And that is the influence of Saturn in your life. And it also is something that you can balance. You can bring harmony and balance to that state if you know what it is. And the language of the planets, the language of astrology gives you very, in my opinion, it's proto-psychology, sure. Like, it's not psychology proper, but it's just as rich and informative as anything. In fact, I think the DSM is way more confusing, and I can never figure out like how I'm supposed to make heads or tails out of this big black book of demonology. Like, I find astrology to be way more elegant, concise, and rich in terms of what it can offer in terms of insight, as well as direction for healing, as well as tremendous amounts of just appreciation for self and others. It's all there. And so to me, I find that the psychological potential and the psychological element of astrology has always been there. But in the 20th century, because Jung was a hermeticist, he really brought it all together and like revived astrology through psychology, because the Western modern world was ready for it again, because psychology is, or at least it was, tremendously shamanic and deeply mystical at its core before the school of behaviorism took over everything. And then
what a nightmare that is.
a nightmare. And
And
obviously the
if you're in
pharmacy.
school now to study psychology and get a degree, that primarily is the focus, is behavioralism.
Oh, I know. I mean,
Absolutely
I know.
horrifying.
It is
You know,
horrifying. I
okay,
had my first.
I have to give you props for that. The talk you just did on planets within,
Yeah.
and that the Renaissance. And I think traditional astrologers listening to this, they would say, well, a lot of that's also involved in the traditional school of
Yeah.
understanding the four humors, and that's all maintained.
Yeah.
I would just add that the missing ingredient, as I've experienced it within that school, is the imagination is somehow left out. But I don't want to go into all of that.
Okay.
But you really did such a great job condensing that, and the poetry of it, and the the alchemy of it that happens when you're with a client, working with their chart, going through approaches like you were just detailing, and then there, in tandem with that, is the universe itself is involved in, or the feeling and the poetic resonance is there just by the logos of astrology being present.
That's right.
So that's something I always find completely mystifying and exhilarating about using astrology to work with people.
Me too. And I feel like if you want to know what makes you an astrologer, it's when you actually open up to other people, whether it's in a
Yes.
formal natal chart reading or just a good conversation at a party, and you feel that light enter you. You feel this flow start to just overtake everything, and you feel graceful, you feel insightful, it feels ecstatic, it feels blissful. It's the same feeling that you get when you're a teacher
Hmm.
and you're just flowing in your classroom and it feels so good. And it's the same feeling as when you know your dance steps and you're no longer thinking about it. You know, you're
Right.
just flying, you're graceful, you're not actually thinking anymore. You're just flowing. So that's what makes you an astrologer. And then and you can experience that even with a small amount of knowledge, as long as it's sincerely learned, you know, and you can continue to expand your technique and your technical knowledge.
Hmm.
But even just the basics, if you learn them sincerely, that's enough architecture for you to actually explore whether or not that flow comes to you, whether or not you're actually kind of born for having these kinds of conversations with people, using this language effectively.
Hmm.
And so I remember, you know, one the teacher that I had online, the last astrology teacher that I had, really emphasized that, like, and it's not to say that you should be a total fraud or a total amateur and know nothing and just start pretending you do. That's not what I'm saying. But what he emphasized, and I agree with, is don't be obsessed with amassing endless quantity of knowledge before you start sharing. Don't hold back from reading your friend's natal chart just because you don't have everything memorized or you think that you have to memorize more, or don't get caught up in quantity over quality,
Right.
because a lot of the art is the space that you hold, and that's magical. I mean, it's not all about how much you know. And so I really did learn that. One of the things that made me finally just start doing this and taking it seriously was that when I went to a professional astrologer to have my natal chart read, the experience was it was so disappointing. It was a very disappointing experience. I felt like really disregarded. And I realized in that moment, like, this person knows more than me. They've been doing it way longer than me. They have more years than me, but I'm a better conversationalist. I was like, I just knew it in my heart. I'm like, I'm better at this. I
Hmm.
would never ever make someone feel disregarded. So even if I know less than this professional, I'm a better astrologer as far as bedside manner, you
This
know?
is why, the majority of patients prefer the care of nurses to doctors.
Right. So, and
Yeah.
then of course, since then I've studied a lot. I still study all the time. I mean, it's like I'm never done studying. This is not to say you get arrogant about like knowing everything. You could never know everything about astrology. This is the oldest body of knowledge on the planet.
Well, yeah, my teacher, Ivy Jacobson, she said, "Well, Fred, you're gonna be a student the rest of your life." She
Yeah.
said, and I think anybody that really gets deep into astrology knows that. I
Yes.
still, when I have a session with a client, I still like consult books prior.
Yeah,
You
of
know, I have
course.
certain books I'll go to and want to, so yeah, that's important for newbies to understand that you have your knowledge you've gained through your
Yeah.
teacher or online, or but your books are there too, and don't feel, you shouldn't be like checking with those to, reference things or whatever.
I take copious notes. I do research for every chart that I read, and I do more than I actually can use most of the time. Like,
Well, sure.
it's
Because
just
it's like
about
it's like writing a book, like same
Mhm.
thing. I take tons of notes, and then that whittles down to like what shows up in the chapter I wrote or whatever. But yeah,
Exactly.
there's notes all over the place. Okay, I'm
Exactly.
going to keep moving.
Right.
Um, in fact, we might have touched on everything I had written out. So yeah, we talked about traditional or modern psychological, getting a vibe for that. I would just say, like, if a person doesn't know what they want to do between those two schools. And of course, there's all these other kinds of schools. So I don't want people like freaking out in the comment section. But those two primary ones, I would say, think of it as like what happens when you toss a coin, and you've got, heads or tails, traditional, modern, and you flip the coin. And while the coin's going up, notice your preference,
Mhm.
because how when you toss a coin, there's something in you's going like, I wanted heads, like, and that's a good way to play with it too. Like, see what your intuition removed from your, formatory mind
Yeah.
does that, decision.
And,
Okay, so I'm going to talk about, because I think I talked on all these topics I'd made notes of. I'm going to share 3 books that I recommend, because we were talking books, and
yeah.
I have 5,000 of them here. So this took me quite a lot to boil it down. I'm kidding, because when I teach, these 2 books are what I have my students start out with. The first one is Benjamin Dyke's
Mhm.
book on traditional astrology for today,
Mhm.
not 500 years ago. And I like this book because it is condensed, and he's a really smart guy,
Mhm.
and he's cute. No, I'm kidding. No, he is. But I, I've read a lot of traditional books, and I don't know, this packs the punch and can give you the essence. And I mean, it's very small, which is fabulous. Because he doesn't have anything superfluous in there. Okay, now this is Crazy Town time. The other book for modern astrology and imbuing what that's about is Astrology for Lovers by Liz Green. And Liz Green, for those that don't know, is a UK astrologer. She's actually from New Jersey originally. And she's a Jungian. And, I have 50 books of hers, but this book, she captures really everything we were talking about with having psychology as a language, as an astrologer. Her introduction to the signs is absolutely stellar.
Mhm.
And I know it's a crazy title, but there it is, Astrology for Lovers.
Awesome. I've
Read it
never read that.
today.
Yeah.
Third, final book. This is kind of a non sequitur, but not really. It's Rick Rubin's new book, The Creative Act. And Rick Rubin's a record producer. Do you know him? Okay. Love the guy. Freaked out when I found out he had a book. And it really is going back to what I started talking about originally, about a person's relationship to nature and how art and artists relate to nature and the creative act and the creative spirit. And that's really what a person's doing when they are an astrologer that has had the teacher disappear on them. And they're out there now as an astrological artist and in the Tao of astrology. So that's my third book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being.
It's a great cover too.
It
Isn't
is.
it? It's killer.
Yeah.
And it's old fashioned, like hardback, where
Nice.
they used to wrap a paper thing around it.
Mhm.
Is this why I've been seeing him on like a million different podcasts that he's been
Yeah.
promoting the book? Okay. Yeah.
A great podcast to catch with him is Conversations with Tyler. You can find that on Spotify. And I think it's his latest one is with Rick Rubin. And Rubin has the sexiest voice, just soft, but manly and ooh, oh. So those are my 3 books. Were you
Right
guys
on.
going to talk books?
Oh,
I'm
well,
happy to talk books.
I mean, I really did share one of my favorite books already. So The Planet
Oh,
Within.
definitely.
Yeah.
Planets Within, Thomas More. We'll
Yeah.
put these up somewhere in the comments on, or the details on the podcast.
Yeah. And then outside of astrology, we've talked about already Sexual Personae by Camille Paglia, which I think
Oh
should
my
be
God, you
essential
try to
reading.
blow people's mind.
But
Yeah.
really, truly, I mean, if you love art, if you love history, if you have any love for Western civilization, there's just an immense life-changing experience that is there if you read Sexual Personae. Again, another book that changed my life.
I've read that book 6 times and I'm still like
Yeah,
working my way through it.
yeah,
But
I
that's
mean,
not a good, I mean, of course you
no,
would say Rick Rubin's not a good,
Yeah.
but that's for a person starting out.
um,
I totally agree that that's a must-read book.
it's
Like,
a philosophical mountain to stand on that
yeah.
will help you to understand astrology in a really deep way, something that is
Mhm.
kaleidoscopic and prismatic rather than dogmatic, rigid, and silly.
But
um
she only talks in astrology in there, like in the Shakespeare section. I know she
yeah,
goes in that,
it's not
but
an astrology book.
right, just as a caveat, but it's a book everyone really ought to explore.
Yeah, it gives context for the why, though. Like, why would somebody be interested in looking at reality through this lens? Why would we want to describe time through myth and symbol? Why are we interested in
Right.
the cycles of history and the patterns that emerge? Why do we love art? These things are all stirred in your soul when you read Sexual Personae. And so I feel like that book gives you a really tremendous why
Mhm.
as to the necessity of having astrologers in the world. And if you're called to be one, you may feel like you have a place in that lineage after you read a book like that, because you realize there's something that resonated deeply in this book for you, something about art, something about history that really moves you. And that's a part of your path. It reveals to you what your voice is or what your perspective is. So I do think that a book like that is essential reading. And how about you?
Um, I would okay, confession time. I've only read a handful of books on astrology. I could probably count them on
Get
one.
out.
Yeah, I could,
Kidding.
but the book what I'm reading right now, and I actually wouldn't recommend this book. It's incredibly
Oh, we're not doing people favors.
yeah, no, but it's incredibly well because I want to make a
Got
point. I
Camille
want
Paglia
to
going. I've got Rick Rubin.
yeah, I want to adapt a point that the author makes in it. I'm reading Mystical Kabbalah by Dion Fortune.
Oh my
Uh,
God, I
yeah,
love that book.
it's a fantastic book.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so I would recommend it if you're ready for a pretty dense read. But the point that I make that I love that she makes in it is that you cannot comprehend the Sephira unless you are looking at them within context of one another, how they relate to each other, So I don't think you could really, for me, when I actually began understanding astrology, was when I began understanding it with its sister disciplines. So the book I would recommend would be Emerald Tablet, Dennis William Hawke. To gain a comprehension of the tradition of alchemy, because Gary Caton, the Hermetic astrologer, he says that the main goal, if you can, outcome of alchemy is this idea of squaring the circle or making fixed the volatile. And so he reads the transits as this alchemical operation that's constantly ongoing, where when a planet is retrograde in a given sign, that's it entering into a fixed state and fixing that element within your chart, whereas when a planet is direct, that's the volatile, it's in motion, it's moving forward. And so to comprehend how the alchemical process, the operations of alchemy work within the soul, work within the mind, work within the body, I think is essential to understand how astrology, how you you do evolve, you know, through the study of astrology, through the comprehension of your natal chart. So I would recommend that would be my book recommendation for
Okay.
for a really, he actually does talk a bit about astrology in there. And this could actually maybe dovetail into when into our next topic on the Aquarian age. Because he talks about the relationship between the astrological the planets and the signs and their corresponding operations in alchemy, and that the glyph for Aquarius, Aquarius is in astrology, or I'm sorry, in alchemy, Aquarius corresponds to the operation of multiplication, which is one of the final stages of the alchemical process, where you have you know, you have discovered the philosopher's stone, and its wisdom multiplies and spread, you know, it fractalizes and spreads throughout, you know, throughout the body, and it sort of becomes like a self-generating machine at that point. And
Mhm.
so he reads that the Aquarian age will be this age where this era where hermetic truths become self-evident, when you know, there is less of this like labor to get the information out, where it's less of, it's not this quirky underground subculture, that we just accept these um principles as fact, you know. So I would strongly recommend opening up to a tandem study of alchemy. And
Mhm.
I'm no practical alchemist either. I mean,
I
you
get
know,
it.
I can barely make a cup of coffee most mornings. So, you know.
That's okay. Awesome. Rachel, I'm going to ask that not now, but maybe when we put these book titles up,
Yeah,
can you toss in a couple of your favorite astrology books for beginners?
for sure. Absolutely.
Okay. Should we break? Take a
Yes.
break,
Yes.
and
Let's break.
I think we hit
Let's
our points on this.
I'm gonna pause recording.
Okay, we're back, and we just had a short break, and we, of course, wished we had taped what we were talking about after we turned the app off, but we're going to recapitulate some of that. And Andrei's going to talk right now a little bit about, um, you know, some more specifics about a student or novice who really is interested in astrology and what's out there in our electronic age that could be accessed. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds great. No, no, I was talking about how recently I was in my app store, like on my phone, updating like Facebook or whatever, and there was it advertised a shop in the app store for astrology apps, the best astrology apps you on the app store. And I opened it up, and like Time Passages, which is just one of the most fundamental astrology software you can use, was not listed. And it was all of this stuff like the sanctuary and the pattern
What's
and these
that sanctuary and pattern?
I don't know what the sanctuary, I don't even know what it is, but the pattern
Oh,
is this overly mystified electronic experience where you type in your birth data, and it's constantly sending you notifications about not transits but life events to prepare for. And I think that this attitude, it just continues this over mystification of astrology,
I
you
think
know.
it promises to find compatibility
Yeah,
with friends that are also on the app as well. So it has a
of
social media
course. Yeah.
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So they tell you who you're good with in terms of friendship as well as romance.
That's how pitiful it's become in
Yeah.
the electronic
Yeah.
age. I
Yeah.
need somebody to tell me who I'm good
Yeah.
with.
and there was nothing, yeah, there was no app listed that just tells you how to pull up your natal chart, you know. And so, you know, I think that the core, the main thing that you can do as a novice would be to just go onto a website like astro.com and pull up your natal chart And even if you don't understand how to interpret it, just learn where your placements are.
Mhm.
You know,
Right.
learn that you're a Mercury in Taurus, you're a sun in you're a sun in Aries. You know, you're a Venus in Pisces. You know, you're a moon in Aquarius. That you
Right.
just have these placement, it's the head bone's connected to the neck bone's connected to the shoulder bone. Just learn where you have, learn the bare bones basics of your natal chart. Don't worry about the interpretation. Don't get wrapped up in the over mystification of the discipline. Just get the basic lexicon into your system. And I just mentioned, that I just got back from a retreat, and it was a spiritual retreat. And when we were just sitting around chit-chatting over coffee, the topic of astrology came up, and the two responses were either, the materialist, oh well, I don't believe in that, that's just, goofball nonsense, it's been disproven by modern science. Or
Yeah.
it was, you know there were people there that had their natal chart read, that did know something a little bit, but they didn't know the basics. One woman was mentioned she had a grand water trine, and I asked, well, what planets are in the grand water trine? Oh, I don't remember. So I would say that the best thing you can do for yourself, if you do want to take your practice and your study further, would be to just punch it, go to astro.com, find the extended horoscope selection, and punch in your birth information, and pull up your chart, and just you don't even have to learn everything. Just learn your rising, and then the seven classicals, sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn.
Right. This is
So
what my teacher did for me, Ivy, when I started. She sent me my chart and listed, Sun in Cancer, Mercury, and that was it. And it wasn't like she was leaving me in the lurch, but I think she knew the magic of a person, just like you're talking about, having the wheel, the mandala,
Mhm.
and the planetary connections into the signs. And then that gets the wheels turning.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that's an excellent suggestion. And then, of course, I did what everyone else would do with this, found, well, what does Moon and Scorpio mean? And,
Mhm.
you start reading the material, and, it just goes from there. But it's like it's like a amulet, a magical amulet, having your chart, knowing your planetary and the lights positions, and you take it from there.
Mm.
absolutely.
So great point. Yeah,
I
Yeah.
love that.
good point.
I like the idea of it being an amulet or a talisman as well, because it's imbued with power by you, your imagination, the scope of imaginative power that you give to your own chart is the value that it has. And
Right.
so that is a very important thing to remember, that we talk to astrologers about our chart to expand the scope of our imagination, to allow for more richness and more potential to be realized. But don't ever let any astrologer, no matter how much of an authority you might view them to be, don't let them poison your mind with something that makes you feel terrible or dreadful about your own chart. That's not healthy, and that's not how you should use astrological
Right.
information.
Right.
Like, not everything is totally love and light. Like, there's a prismatic quality to astrology that covers every human experience. So it's not to say that you want to be like ridiculously soft, fuzzy, and optimistic about everything, but no person's perspective on your chart should limit your imagination about who you are and what you're capable of. So, and it is like a talisman in that way. Like it has magical power because that's what you give it. You know, it's your imagination that empowers it. So
Yeah, absolutely. And then
yeah.
when you have that foundation of your chart, and again, like you're saying, aside from the astrologers or teachers or people commenting on it,
Yeah.
it is really your synthesis that's happening with your chart. And then of course, with the transits, because the transits are what light up the different points on the wheel,
Yep.
and you start to really, see like what is applicable and what isn't. And what I mean by that is, um, like you start to notice what are the like hot spots of your horoscope. And like I know for me, it's always Moon and Saturn.
Mm,
Those are getting transited.
mhm.
The literalism of it is almost mind blowing. Like
Mm,
I'll never forget when Uranus opposed literally by the degree and almost minute my moon in the fourth. My mom moved into my house,
wow.
and that's there's a whole saga around that. But I was just like, Jesus, fuck! Like this is like, whoa! Like so you start to you know you start to embody the chart and see that kind of relationship with real time cosmic cycles and stuff like that.
Yeah. And that's what makes it addictive, if you will. I think.
Well, definitely not well addictive, but also like just more of a deep dive. Like Jesus, wow.
The zodiac is the ultimate pusher.
That's good.
But yeah, but any like revelation of synchronicity has that. It's exciting because it reveals that you're in a dialogue with nature, with the cosmos itself.
You'll be coming back to your chart every day saying, you got any new stuff?
But that's not true. People ask me, do you check your chart all the time for this and that? And I really don't.
No.
It's generally after the fact of
Yeah.
some event,
Yes.
like the thing with my mom. And then sorry, when Uranus retrograded back onto my moon, my
Yeah.
mom was gone.
Oh wow.
So it was like, well, no, she moved back to California.
Hmm.
But I was just like, God, this is really crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like in that like crazy freaky way. I don't know.
Yeah. I was exaggerating. It's not really addictive. And if you do check your chart every day, you have a problem, then you become,
Thank you.
Yogananda said an overly mechanistic dependency. He described it as slavish dependence. That's the quote from Yogananda. Slavish dependence on the mechanistic element is
Right.
not
Right.
actually
Yeah.
ideal.
Because
And
it's meant to liberate you.
yeah, it's meant to liberate you. But the
Well, and
synchronicities
it's so
are
much does the opposite though. Like with people, like people posting videos or blogs about every minutia of this transit or that, and this is happening. This what and like
yeah.
I always look at that stuff. I'm like, God, does this person like are they living their life? Like, are they going out and doing things, or just like, so there's that's one of the warnings about that
Hmm.
kind of tracking, I think,
I
is that it can become
agree.
obsessive.
I agree.
Yeah, a
I
fear
agree.
of living.
And I highly recommend reading. You can look it up. It's all over the internet for free, but just look up Paramahansa Yogananda on astrology. It's a little essay that he wrote, and it's excellent. It's a great philosophical cleanse to help you not actually ever allow that to happen to you. And he,
Didn't an astrologer read his chart when he was a child and said he
yeah,
was going to become like some mid-level bureaucrat and
no,
have 10
it's
kids or
he was
something?
going to marry 3 times,
Yeah.
and he was like, a spiritual prodigy from early childhood, and he knew that he was going to devote his life to God, and he was like sure of it because he had been communing with Divine Mother ever since his earthly mother died, since early childhood, and he was like absolutely certain of his path. And his family was well to do, and it's traditional to have the best Vedic astrologer available to come to do your child's chart and give everybody an idea of what's to come in their life. And he was told, not only are you going to be a householder, you're going to have 3 different wives. And he
Mm,
burned his natal chart, and freed
Mark,
himself of that. Which again, like that's bringing it back to your natal chart is your talisman, and we can look at Yogananda's natal chart from our perspective now in retrospect and see like, well, he was a Sagittarius, it makes sense that he was really devoted
right?
to discovering God. It seems like actually when you look at his chart, not at all shocking that that's how his life unfolded, but he had to do that for himself. He had to actually reject fatalism,
Hmm.
which is really important to do. And we do this to ourselves. We all have a superstitious mind, and we all get very mechanistic, especially in this world of everything being automated. And one reason I really don't recommend these apps, especially something like the Pattern, I don't have a familiarity with all of them, but I have played with the Pattern. And what I really don't like about it is that it gives you no information as to why it's giving you this advice. It doesn't say Mercury transiting natal Pluto. It doesn't tell you Sun entering into your 3rd house. It doesn't say anything. It doesn't give you any data points for you to
Hmm.
go study yourself or start recognizing patterns for yourself. It's literally asking you to be slavishly dependent on it. And even if it was super well written and very insightful, which it's not, but even if it was, that's a really bad premise to start any study from. So just reject things that actually are overly mystifying, like Andrei said. Just learn basics for yourself. Your own interpretation by your own observation will be way better. And nothing that's in a book or an app can actually give that to you. The experience of synchronicity is 100% personal journey,
Mhm.
and so you have to reach out for that for yourself.
Yeah,
you
and
know
it
And
also.
I would say, sorry, Andre, I would just add, you have to have skin in the game, meaning you've got to put in the study and the meditation and the notation and, really kind of dig in there
yeah
to, suss it out
yeah
more
Yeah.
instead of just a passive, being showered with data
right.
about this or that. Like get in there and really, study what's going on. But going back to Andre's point, it all starts with that foundation of understanding the configuration of your natal birth chart.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's like there's also this element to it where it's like claiming the territory for yourself,
Mhm.
where if you get in there and you learn where your placements are before anybody else can tell you, it's like you've stuck the flag on the moon. You carve those grooves. And then the lacquer couldn't, you could have all the more, you could have a paint job or a lacquer job done by a professional, but you yourself made the imprint in your own psyche, in your own neural pathways. You carved those neural pathways yourself. And so there's more like it's mine.
So yeah, because I used to work with different astrologers, over the years that I would consult with when I was, checking in with how things were going. And everything that I learned or heard from them, I took that in, but then it all really just became sort of grist for the mill, really,
Hmm.
because like I said, having skin in the game and my own chart, I was taking in the data, their viewpoint, their opinion, their knowledge. And then I was still working and massaging it all myself.
Mhm.
So it was actively involved with the astrological dialectic.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So get out of the passive mode and get involved into the alchemical mode. That's, I think, a good way to say it.
Amen.
And
Yeah.
then this brings us to the topic of sovereignty and what we're going to talk about now with the Aquarian age,
Absolutely.
which is part of the episode today. And why don't you start with that, Andrei? Because you made that distinction,
Yeah, well,
and
because what what we've just spent the last 20 minutes ruminating on is this idea of personal autonomy,
Mhm.
that you're taking the jar lid off yourself. You're not handing it to somebody else to do for you, and that just gives you this sense that of self-sufficiency, sovereignty, that I can do this. I may need help, spreading the jam on the toast. I may need somebody, I may need to use a toaster to toast the toast, but I took the lid off the jar. I can do this.
Mhm.
And with, with the dawning of the age of Aquarius, so to speak, with this, this Aquarian age that we're living in, that my personal opinion started with the great conjunction in 2020, but with Jupiter and Saturn in at the first degree of Aquarius.
That's when you're connecting the
Yeah,
official
that got the
start
ball
of the
rolling.
Aquarian
Yeah,
age.
yeah, that got the ball rolling for the Aquarian age, and then we just had
Got the ball rolling. That's a good way to say it.
yeah, and then we just had the new moon in Aquarius, like within 1 degree of that point of that point. Um, and so I, and it's something we said earlier too, like the guru-less world, where we have learned all the lessons, and it's time for us to take responsibility for ourselves as sovereign individuals. And I think that is what's going to develop over the epoch,
Mhm.
is are people removing themselves from government interference, toxic community, uh and actually becoming fully automated systems, without much interference from the external world. Scholars are calling it the network society. And you're seeing it in things like cryptocurrency and what's the platform for cryptocurrency? Help me out here. Uh,
Blockchain.
blockchain technology, these distributed networks, where rather than being like folk or gathered around one single focus point, we are going to actually be a network of distributed individuals. And we're human beings, we're social creatures, we're always going to gather, in collectives.
Mhm.
But I think that there's going to be a greater balance between the collective and the individual. I think, without the collective, the individual's going to suffer. They're going to be, you're going to be miserable, because you're not going to have a decent world left to live in. You're not going to have a fire department putting out fires. You're not going to have a hospital healing the sick. Well, I don't know, it's debatable whether hospitals actually heal the sick, but you're not going to have you're not going to have farmers market to get your groceries at. But I think without an emphasis on the individual, the collective is going to be miserable. You're going to have
It's the board.
yeah, you're gonna have the Borg. You're gonna have 1984. You're gonna have totalitarianism. You're gonna have just a world where there is no personal identity.
Slavish dependence on mechanism.
Yeah, slavish dependent on mechanism. So
You know.
I think for my assessment that is going to be what is going to blossom through the Aquarian epoch. And I think especially the decan of Aquarius, where the great conjunction took place, the first decan, Austin Coppock calls that the mark of the heretic,
Exile,
the mark of the exile, and he describes that it's a place of heresy, where the heretic and holds power, where the exile is king.
It's where you break from the herd.
Where you break from the herd. So I think that there's going to be a lot antinomian and unorthodox beliefs will proliferate during this time, and that you will be rewarded for questioning orthodoxy. You will be rewarded for breaking from the herd. So that's my assessment.
Agreed. But what I didn't think about so much before, I saw that pattern in like 2019, 2018, when we were meditating on Pluto entering Aquarius in 2023. And I kind of saw like a rosy view of heretics, outsiders, heretics and exiles rising in importance. But what I didn't realize, and it's so obvious now, is that in order for there to be a lot of exiles and heretics, the orthodoxy itself has to become very severe. It has to become quite totalitarian and authoritarian. The climate has to become very threatening and conformist in order for there to be inspiring heretics and exiles. And so I thought that was funny that I didn't really see that. But I
remember when Pluto went into, and now we're shifting a bit to Pluto, but I think it fits the dialogue because Pluto going into Aquarius is another beat into the Aquarian mindset, or whatever you want to call it. When Michael Luton talked a lot about this, like when right when Pluto went into Capricorn, of course, there was the global economic crisis, but in light of what you were saying, Rachel, the establishment, the corporate world, if I guess sensing that kind of dissolution that was upcoming with Pluto, tightened down even more. So the whole corporate ideology and everything that drives capitalism at that level, that's what we've been living through for the last, I don't know how many years Pluto's been in Capricorn. And now I guess you could look at Pluto going into Aquarius, the same kind of like tightening down within Aquarian themes is going to happen as a reactive experience of Pluto undoing, moving into that realm. So what, technology comes up immediately to my mind with Aquarius. So what do you think that ratcheting down, and then I love that notion of heretics kind of arising as pushback or blowback or whatever. But what do you think within the technological field that kind of tightening is going to be reacting to the dissolution? Because we're seeing it now. Social media is caving in.
I was going to start with. Can I?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of there's going to be a lot of there's going to be an attempt to accelerate the censorship, and we've seen a lot of in the last 3 years. And we've seen heretics breaking from the herd, like Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi. Where
Saturn has been in Aquarius.
While Saturn has been in Aquarius. So I think there's going to be that's going to be an attempt. I also think that there's going to be this rollout of the digital dollar to control where you can spend your money, to control where you can spend your time, essentially.
Control everything.
So I think that the the dark side of Aquarius, this overemphasis on the collective and the role that you play in it, in the words you speak in it, and the voice you have in it will be what we see play out in that attempt to put the lid back on the
To turn everyone into
jar.
a drone,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. So that's what immediately came to my mind is
Yeah, that image of the Borg from
Yeah.
Star Trek is a great one, Rachel, because
Yeah.
that really would be like, the things left unchecked, everything kind of moving in that direction. But
Right.
I because I'm online so much because of work,
Mhm.
what's so interesting to watch happening in light of what Andrei's saying is people are abandoning social media, though not entirely, but it doesn't have the same lure that it had before. But they're going to things like nodal, Discord servers,
Yep.
and micro communities starting, to form up there.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the direction the bigger momentum will be happening within. So
Absolutely.
you'll have to it'll almost be like knocking on the door where the person opens the little thing to see who you
Yeah.
are, to go into these things. But I think that's where a lot of things are going to start cogitating.
That's right.
Speakeasy culture.
And yet, when you think
Right.
about like what the status quo will be comprised of, even though it's going to be very powerful because it's represented by, all these globalized powers, they don't really, in the end, have the numbers, like people are not interested in that anymore.
Say that again. What now?
The decentralization of culture and
Mm,
influence is going to
mm,
be remarkable. And so the world as like a centralized power, the way that mass society that developed because of mass media throughout the 20th century, which reached its apex while Pluto was transiting through Capricorn, the continuous centralization of power and influence is dissolving, and therefore we will have these little tribes, these little networks, these little communities, but it will be more powerful than the status quo. It'll be more powerful than the world, because what's inside the citadel is not valuable to anybody. So being outside the citadel eventually, in my opinion, will actually be way more powerful and way more lively and way more real. So it's not going to feel like, total exile in the wilderness
right.
without, it's not abandonment. I feel like the citadel will rot and everyone on the outside of it will celebrate. It's going to feel more like that, I believe.
Do you think
That's just the
people
way.
will like merge back more into, human actual contact?
Yeah.
Like people, that was the thing about COVID. It was such a weird prelude within that idea of things clamping down
Mhm.
before a major shift.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it was just so crazy how everything was shut down, locked down, stuck, and then forcing you into Facebook, forcing you into Zoom. It was just like I could see some of the crazy rationale of, conspiracy theory types, like, this was the new reset.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to connect everybody up into, relying on this or that technology. But do
Mhm.
you think people will return more to social gatherings and meetings and communities and,
Yeah.
I do, because Aquarius is not just about technology. It's not just about what we can do with our minds to create ease in our world, in the world of matter. It's etheric, it's interdimensional, and therefore it's
but
spiritual.
it's relational,
It
human
Yeah.
is.
relational. I
That's
mean,
right.
I think we should talk just quickly about technical idea, that technical aspect of when people hear like Aquarian age,
Yeah.
where is that coming from as far as precession of the
Oh,
equinox and, the idea we're leaving the Piscean age that was about 2,500 years, right?
mhm.
Mhm.
And then moving as the equinoxal point. I don't even know. This is how bad I am on trying to explain this. Like the precession of the equinox as it's moving backwards through the zodiac puts us into the different ages, correct?
That's
Yes.
right. That's right. It's well, here's a really fascinating idea. One of the reasons that like not official archaeology, but more crypto archaeology believes that the Sphinx in Egypt is about 12,500 years old is because when they calculated using the precession of the equinoxes back to the time that it appears to have been built, they have other evidence that it's that old as well. It's not just this, but when they combined the physical evidence of it being much older, having existed in a different climate, and then they calculated back to the age of Leo, the precession of the equinoxes actually being the age of Leo, what the Sphinx actually was positioned as doing was facing the rising sun on the spring equinox as the sun rose in the constellation of Leo.
Mhm.
And that was an age of 2,000 years, like, and so crypto archaeologists believe that the Sphinx was actually built to honor and recognize the rising of the sun at the spring equinox in the sign of Leo. And that's all that we're calculating. It's just when the sun moving through the sky, moving through the constellations over epochs of 2,000 years.
Right.
And, so that was a long time ago. That was 12,500 years ago, approximately.
And now now the opposite is happening.
The calculation of when the age of Aquarius begins is extremely murky and totally unsatisfying to me. So I can't say for sure when it begins. There's so many different ideas about when it exactly begins. So we can definitely say that if we're not in the Aquarian age exactly, we are definitely in an Aquarian era that is leading up to the Aquarian
Right,
age.
like a cusp or
Yeah.
what. And when you have 2,500 years defining an age,
Yeah.
cusp isn't going to be,
Yeah.
just like that. There's
The
going to be,
cusp is centuries.
I
Like,
think this is a thing too that a mantra we could meditate on in this Aquarian era is the map is not the territory, that basic kind of like Robert Anton Wilson general semantics maxim, where when Rachel sent out a few years ago something about blah 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 Age of Aquarius, Saturn, Jupiter Saturn conjunction, so a few type A's raised their hand, they wrote in, but Miss Caperso, isn't it actually quite a while off until the precession of the equinox, and it's like, one of the things you learn when you start getting the principles of astrology internalized is how to read the signs. There are things like the Great Conjunction, and then you just also learn how to read the signs in society and the world, and okay, has the official precession of the equinox changed? Are we within the orb, or can I actually just break from all of that dogma and look at what's going on in the world, and look at a few little data points I have based on some basic transit interpretation I've done, and make that judgment myself, because I have the personal autonomy, because I can open the jar myself.
Yeah. And it's like, just being with wide eyes wide open, checking stuff out, and then making the notes. Pluto going into Aquarius, the big conjunction, and formulating it on your own. Absolutely.
yeah. If you wanted to look at it just through literary terms, it's foreshadowing.
Yeah.
But you can learn a lot from
Yes.
foreshadowing.
Yes.
A lot. And you should be able to if you're a good reader. So
yes, we are in the first act where Chekhov's pistol has been introduced. And we are
Right.
awaiting that final act for it to go off.
The foreshadowing contains all the themes that will be explored.
I was listening to an interview, speaking of Camille Paglia, the other night with her. It was an old recording. I forget what the theme was. I think something to do about religion and Hollywood, which only she could combine. And she was talking about, I mean, she has such a dour outlook on, art today. It's not really in painting. It's not really even much in music anymore. She sees it as architecture and technology. And technology is now the mode that art is like rumbling through. So I think that too is, because I tended to agree with her. I follow a lot of things happening, in art and constantly listening to music. And I think she's right. Technology, the digital, as depressing as it sounds, is really where the spirit of art is thriving and moving and grooving. And that's quite Aquarian, again.
Streaming has taken over cinema, and then the movie that's gotten the asses back in the seats last year was the Avatar sequel, and that's an entirely digital affair. So I second that notion.
Even that movie that's up for, I just saw the Academy Award nominations today, and that film, I think the title is like Everything Everywhere at the Same Time.
Yeah.
Everything Everywhere All at Once.
All at once. Thank you.
Like
if that's not Aquarian.
Yeah.
But I thought, wow, okay, right, got it.
Yeah.
And then of course, behind that is Avatar. That has a whole Aquarian theme.
Absolutely.
It's liquidy, but the whole communities and fighting against technology as corporate lords and all that is in that story.
And finding technology within actually some very primal, I'll say, concepts, where the technology of the heart, the ability to actually just you work with your environment intuitively, rather than dominating your environment through the inventions of your mind.
Right.
That's why I don't think of the Aquarian age as being exclusively technological in this cyberpunk fantasy world kind of.
Well, that's the old part of it. We haven't seen what the new thing is.
No. And Aquarius is ultimately like, it's a deeper esoteric concept. It's the zodiac is the evolution of consciousness itself. And Capricorn, the sign that precedes Aquarius, represents mastery over the earthly realm, mastery of matter. And so building tremendous works, civilization, the Great Pyramids, like all of this mastery over matter, which concentrates power into cities and into institutions and traditions. And it's wonderful in its own way. But what we're dealing with right now is a lot of rot and decay that we have to experience, of the institutions and the civilization that we had once relied upon. We're definitely in a decadent, late decadent period. And Aquarius represents what lies beyond that, what lies beyond mastery over matter, and both signs are ruled by Saturn. So Saturn's first lesson is first master Earth. First, master the building blocks of life, work with matter itself, the limitations, time and space. What lies beyond that is the question. And it's a mystery. It's this great mystery. Like, what else is there? Once I've made money and climbed the ladder, and once I've gotten a great job or I've gotten the education, once I've been worldly and conquered the world or climbed some ladders, like, what's next? What other questions are we asking?
That's when it's time for the ayahuasca retreat.
Well, yeah, but you go out into the wilderness, what's outside of the world, and that's where Aquarius lives, as this bridge between worlds.
Right.
And that's ancient, past, and future. It's also spirit and matter. So it's not just about matter anymore. It's about breaking through to other dimensions, other levels of reality, which is one of the reasons why I think it's important to remember the traditional rulership of Aquarius is Saturn. And even though Uranus speaks highly of Aquarius, and we love the Uranian themes, the reality is Saturn gives you the tools to break through space and time. Saturn gives you the tools to break through the limitations of the Saturnian realm. And the way that we break through limitations is through focused imagination. That's what Aquarius is about, using your mind to focus like a laser until a breakthrough happens. That's exactly what a laser does. It can cut through anything. So that's the discipline that Saturn actually teaches in the realm of Aquarius. And that's why you have to be on the edge. You can't be in the world getting caught up in drama and expectation and the desire for status and the desire for power. You have to be in a quiet space on the edge. You actually have to have freedom to be quiet. Like, you have to have some space and some time to yourself to actually commune with higher dimensions, higher intelligence.
Well, and other human beings in a
Other human beings.
heartfelt brotherhood, sisterhood way, you know.
That's what comes from
like,
that experience.
right,
Yeah, it's
right.
like everything flattens out. Like all the mountaintops and the castles of Capricorn flattens out, and you suddenly can see from that objective distance from the world that, oh yeah, everything's interconnected. All life is equally valuable. It's not the same. That's a stupid notion. Life is not all the same. People are not all the same. And that's the Borg. That's the conformity. That's the philosophical deafness and numbness that is really tormenting our world right now, trying to make everybody the same. People are not the same, but they're all equally valuable. Their life is just as sacred as yours, but not all plant life is the same, and not all people are the same. And if you think of people as being all the same, I think it's probably the greatest insult to the human spirit that you could ever perpetrate, and that's not what Aquarius is about. Ultimately, Aquarius is about seeing the ecological reality of consciousness, of all life on the planet, the reality of time as a loop, where ancient past and future converge at a single nexus point. It's really expanding. And so when we think about, like, are we going to all become slaves to our technology? Some people will. Like, some people will become serious drug addicts. It's going to be a problem. We have serious problems with drugs and stuff, but no, not every person is going to be swept up in that. I think the overall, like, the positive force of evolution is going to be to merge spirit and matter once again, not have them be separate like they were from the Enlightenment on, but instead have things become whole and holistic again. So the value of human connection and the value of human life, it's going to become just common sense again. Like, it used to be common sense in Western civilization. It's still common sense to people all over the world. This is like a very Western Eurocentric paradigm that we're discussing, but really basic humanity, I do believe, is going to return to common sense. And so obviously the value of actual connection, actual collaboration, those things will actually thrive. I don't think people want to live in pods. I don't think ultimately
eat bugs.
Well, maybe some people eat really strange things. As a vegetarian, I look skeptically at a lot of food choices, but yeah, I really have an optimism for the Aquarian age. That's what I feel. Yeah.
I think we all have to keep that as like a beacon.
Yeah.
As we move through this kind of weird cusp phase, especially with Pluto going in there, which is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, is this a good point to segue?
I was going to say, speaking of Pluto,
Yeah, and
and
Capricorn and
mercurial fun.
yeah.
We're ready to move on to the
Worst astrology of the month.
favorite segment of our
Yeah.
podcast
Yeah.
YouTube thing.
Mm.
So February 10th,
Mhm.
Friday, Mercury will conjunct Pluto, and we're choosing that as our worst. And of course, this is tongue in cheek, people.
Yeah.
The worst astrology of the month. So I'll share some quick thoughts about Mercury Pluto. It's sort of like a mental enema.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah. So I think it's a great time to really let yourself sink into like what's feeling as far as thought forms and mental processes, like what's toxic or what, you just this is ready to be jettisoned. So
Yeah.
that's my take on the Mercury Pluto conjunction on February
Mm.
10th.
Yeah,
Can I pick that
for
up?
sure.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I'm seeing that there's going to be a sextile with Neptune
Oh
in
wow, he's deep
Pisces.
diving now.
Yeah, so I'm kind of getting like the shot that shot in Train Spotting where Ewan McGregor goes into the toilet.
Oh my
So
God.
so
Yeah.
so I'm seeing like it's not there's a world, there's going to be a world within that enema that can be explored.
No, we'll say more about the sextile. Like, what is as a
Well, the support from Neptune in Pisces, I think is going to lend that otherworldly quality, that it's not just going to be a purge, but it looking within that purge, you're going leaning into that purge, you're going to experience worlds within worlds. You're going to find the
wow.
lost city of Atlantis within. So yeah, it's gonna
I
be
love it.
it's gonna be like it's gonna be like Indiana Jones meets Gummo.
Wow. Um, just in more practical terms, you might have some very dark dreams, that's for sure. But the way that I look at Mercury conjoined Pluto in kind of like an everyday what might happen, this is the kind of day where you hear very difficult truths spoken.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be secrets that have been kept from you. And I notice a lot of times with significant transits to Pluto, like secrets that have been held back from you that are rightfully yours to know, that you're being manipulated with, they come out. Somebody just spills the beans, or you have a conversation that goes in a direction that is a lot more raw and honest than,
Or like a trapdoor.
yeah, like suddenly you're being extremely intimate with somebody. And this could really surprise you because it could be somebody at work that you've been very on guard with. It could be a cousin, or it could be your most intimate partner or lover. I mean, who knows? But things just do like start spilling out, things that have been hidden in the dark, things that have been repressed. So it could be some very painful truths. And it doesn't look good for, people in power. Their secrets just come flying out. So I imagine there's going to be a lot of PR damage control that's trying to cover things up at this time. Because a lot of scandals just slip out, Yeah.
Great.
Well, I
Good
mean,
take.
Yeah.
it is at the same degree or within a degree of the US Pluto return.
Yeah.
So and we've got this thing with the documents.
Oh, they're popping up, and
Yeah,
they found shit at his place.
yeah,
Trump,
like
and then
he's
Biden.
that, like, yeah, he's got him, in his fucking, they found it in his Monopoly box.
Right.
Like, so I think that story could potentially come to a head.
Well, think
um
about the George Santos thing, that crazy dude that got elected out of I forget what part of New York.
And he lied about
Yeah,
everything.
I mean, and I'm just thinking this Pluto Mercury thing would be the perfect time to, like, cut their losses with that dude,
Yeah,
because it's so much about the negative side of Mercury, all
yeah.
the audacity and just, the mercurial shape shift, he's just,
The relative truth
well, the
yeah,
androgyny, he's
yeah.
now in drag down in Brazil, and this has been outed as trans, and it's just like, so he's the poster child, I think, for this February 10 conjunction. So I'm
Wow.
curious to see how that goes. So I
Yeah.
think we should wrap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I would love for people watching, and we'll send this out in our newsletters and my Substack and stuff, but would love to hear feedback from folks and topics, suggestions that they'd like to see us cover.
Mhm.
So if we get enough of those and weed through them, we'll, maybe fashion the next episode that includes some of that stuff. What do you guys think?
That's
Absolutely.
fantastic.
Great.
All
All right.
right.
Well, it's been a blast.
Yeah.
Totally. Thank you, Frederick.
Yeah.
Have a
Thank
beautiful
you
day.
guys. And see everybody next time.
For sure.
Yes.
All right.
All
Peace.
right. Same bat time, same bat hour.
Right.